Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce and beyond to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and way beyond that as you up arrow your business and your personal life. Today's guest knows something every e-commerce founder needs to hear, that bravery is not optional. Jim Moorhead is more than a keynote speaker on brave leadership. He's lived it in the highest stakes arenas imaginable. He's been a federal prosecutor standing just feet away from armed robbers in the courtroom. He's battled through the dot-com bust as a startup CFO, stretched VC dollars with creativity like the now famous Light Bulb Award, which we'll talk about, and advised Fortune 500 companies through moments of crisis when everything seemed to be collapsing. Before that, he cut his teeth on Wall Street as an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. And along the way, he built the philosophy that bravery isn't a one-time act, it's a discipline. Jim's Stand Brave framework helps companies outperform by unlocking brave leadership. Additionally, his book, The Instant Survivor, has been called a field guide for leaders navigating chaos. So today, we're going to explore what bravery really looks like in e-commerce, how to spot when your company has a bravery problem, how to build a team that acts boldly, and how you as a leader can model courage when the pressure is highest. Jim, welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast.
Really pleased to be here, William. Thank you.
Yeah. I got to give a shout out to the magnificent Melanie Marshall, former Deputy Bureau Chief of the BBC, previous guest on the Up Arrow Podcast, and herself quite the expert on bravery as well, for making this introduction. Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
Yeah. Last interruption, then we'll dig right into the good stuff. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with the largest one selling for nearly $800 million and one that IPO'd. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. That said, on to the good stuff. Jim, you are famed as the bravery guy, but what's the origin? How did you get that nickname?
Well, I'd say it started with working as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland. And, you know, when you're doing that, you have to be brave, not just in front of judges who can ask some pretty sharp questions, but in front of juries and really persuade them to the fact that the defendant that they're watching is guilty of the crimes charged. But I'd say the bigger step, too, is to really support the witnesses who have to testify, because testifying, of course, in a criminal courtroom is terrifying, not something that people, have done before. They're subject to fierce cross-examination. And so getting them ready for that and having them feel proud of themselves when they testify and proud of what they're doing was something that really brought me a lot of personal and professional fulfillment.
Yeah.
But, just to stay with you for a moment, I'd say the things you mentioned earlier are what, I've really kind of built a life around bravery. I got a chance to work in other brave places like the U.S. Attorney's Office and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and to advise Fortune 500 CEOs about how to be brave when facing a crisis. And then also just to lead teams around a brave vision, because as you mentioned, bravery is not optional. If you want to outperform, you have to be brave.
Yeah. You brought up the courtroom there a little bit, the federal prosecutor. And so I have to ask, I'm sure you saw a lot of crazy things. Was there ever a moment that you were just genuinely a little bit of afraid?
Well, not unusual. I was threatened by a defendant. And fortunately, there are U.S. Marshals who are in the courtroom, and they understand it's their job to protect everyone, judge, bailiffs, lawyers in the courtroom. So luckily, when I was physically threatened by one defendant, the U.S. Marshal was there quickly to step in on it. But I'd say, you're so focused on what you're doing and you believe in it so much that being afraid wasn't something that was really on the menu.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like this came up recently this summer. I've got some young daughters, and they were at like this, middle school camp out, and one thing was said to one and one thing was said to another. And, this turned into this thing where it's like the parents are saying, what was said, what was said. And so we just sat the two girls down, in a coffee shop. It's like, hey, what's going on? You guys are best friends. What's happening? And the tears flow, even just in that moment, trying to state their position or whatever. And like, this is not a federal courtroom. I can only imagine the feelings that people who are in a federal courtroom, up there, giving their testimony might feel. How do you coach them to be able to say what they've said a million times, not in that situation, to be able to still say what they need to be able to say at that moment?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one example. There was a witness who was in a bank, and four guys came in with shotguns, and one of them forced her into the vault, and she testified that she kept trying to position herself away from him. And I asked her why that was, and she said it was because she was 6 months pregnant and didn't want to be shot in the stomach. Yeah. So that was a traumatic experience for her. And I'd say the way that I got her ready was to, in some ways, make it all real. I brought her to the courtroom where she would testify when it was empty. I role-played the kinds of questions she could expect from defense attorneys. I showed her exactly what photographs I would be showing her of the bank. And, because the cameras go off, right? And so they start to reflect what occurred. And she was then in a position, in a way, to be color commentator and say, here's what's happening. Here's where I was. Here's the gun pointing at me. So I think the fact of giving her as much comfort as you can of here's what it's going to be like to take her to the real place, to get her ready. And she did just an outstanding job.
I like that you talk about even just getting into the right place, because I feel like that's something that we have to do all the time as founders and anybody, where oftentimes you can maybe think one thing in one situation, but literally being in a different physical place can change that. And I think I've even heard that's true for taking tests, right? That it's like, if you sit in the same seat, you're likely to remember the things that you learned and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as founders, there's a bit of truth to that. And even if you can't maybe get into to the physical space that you need to be, but visualizing that as a point can help too.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time when I was getting ready to make opening and closing arguments of visualizing myself in the courtroom and sitting in a chair that would resemble where it was in the courtroom, and standing up and then moving over to speak in front of the jury, and just reinforcing that this was the way it would unfold in my mind was the way it would unfold in the courtroom.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a study that was done, I believe it was the Cleveland Clinic around 2008. And I've shared this before on the podcast, but it's really good, relevant here, where they had patients basically imagine working out, where they would imagine doing these different workouts. And I don't remember the exact extent, but I think it's like 8 weeks where they just imagined it. And they showed, like, I think it was significant, like 28% improvement in strength in that workout 8 weeks later without ever having done the workout.
Right.
And a lot of that was because it developed the right neurons and connections and everything for them to be able to do that. And I think to your point, where it's like, the more that we can prepare ourselves, run through these scenarios, you talk about, there are a lot of people will talk about, it's like, well, in order for you to be successful, you have to visualize the success. And let's say, throw out, any of the stuff that you might say, like, oh, that sounds like too wishy-washy. There's something to be said for your body actually wiring the connections that it needs to have in order to be in the right spot. So that way, when you are in the courtroom, it's already gone through the scenario. It's run through maybe the nerves that you would have had, and it's already learned, hey, I know how to regulate my body in this scenario now.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, one of the ways that you try to speed things up to become an excellent trial lawyer in the courtroom is to read books about other trials that have happened, and to really learn to see what lawyers did in those situations. And I think the same thing is true for founders of companies, because they can listen to how I built this, for example, right? And hear how others got their companies going, or just read in CEO Magazine or Inc. or wherever, right? Because then you start to see patterns, and you start to recognize when something comes up in your startup. Oh, I remember that's how that was handled over here, and learn from that. So it's part of that visualizing, as you said, of what's the world around me and how can I react best to it.
I love that. Speaking of reading, I remember you telling me that one of your influencers was young man Luther. Made an impact on you when you were younger. What did the idea of what age were you when you read that, and how did this idea of Brave Revolution what did it spark in you?
Okay, so I was in high school, and this was a book about Martin Luther, and it was done by a psychiatrist really trying to kind of understand Martin Luther, what led him to take such a brave stand against the church and against its practices of indulgences, and challenge also the idea that in order to have a relationship with God, it had to go through the priests at the front of the church, right? That you could have a direct relationship with God, the priesthood of every believer, as they called it. But what struck me was his personal bravery, because he was called in front of the church. He was excommunicated. He was threatened with death, and only a royal figure in where he lived kind of pretended to kidnap him, and then in fact shielded him.
Wow.
But he was unwavering in his view, and so that was extremely impressive, and just was a kind of model. Not that anything in my life has resembled something of that magnitude, but we all can kind of play off people who we admire and try to absorb lessons from their life.
No, that's good. I want to shift focus a little bit into frameworks of bravery. You told me that bravery isn't innate, it's a muscle. How do we work that muscle?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to really kind of open up the conversation around bravery, because, if you think about it, William, right? We didn't grow up around the table, with our parents saying, let's talk about bravery, or in school or anywhere really, right? And so that's not to say we weren't aware of bravery. We would admire people who did brave things and maybe absorb that, but we didn't then think, okay, kind of how did that happen and how can I do it? And, the first step is really to hold up the mirror to yourself and to say, why do I want to be brave? Where will that lead me? What's holding me back from being brave? Who do I look around and see right now that I admire, who I think is brave, and what brave things are they doing? And how could I bring that back to my own situation, whether as a founder of a startup or emerging company, and particularly then the biggest step is to how to start that conversation after, in a way, you have it with yourself, with your team. Because at its best, bravery is a shared experience, and it's a shared culture where all of you are empowered, encouraged, invited to have honest conversations and to point out problems and to suggest better solutions. Because if you're looking for growth and innovation, that's how it happens. It happens through the path of bravery.
I think about how you talk about this is a shared experience, and it feels like a lot of times we are more brave when somebody else around us is brave, right? It's almost contagious. If you see somebody be brave, you're like, oh, maybe I could do that then too. It seems like this is something that typically is going to start with the leader of the organization, but it maybe doesn't have to. This could start with somebody else on the organization too, right? And maybe encouraging the leader.
Yeah, that's right. So I think it's probably going to start with a team leader who's going to start this conversation, and also start to identify what are brave actions that we want to take, and that we will support each other and support our growth individually, but support our growth as a team. And so it's so important to have that shared conversation. Bravery isn't something you can dictate to others. You can't It has to be something that, as you said, is practiced and learned, and something that people are proud about. Because a lot of people, get trapped in myths about bravery. They think, oh, brave people are born brave, or brave people are special, or I'm not brave because my fear of being brave is unique. And we know, and that's all baloney, right? People do brave things despite their fear. And that's what's important to understand. Bravery is not moving without fear. It's moving in the face of fear and uncertainty and change. And if I just maybe one quick thing to add to that. You see, I think a lot of leaders are struggling because they don't realize that their bravery is on empty. And what that means when it's on empty is that they play it safe and they stick with the status quo, and they stick with strategies that are outdated. And the critical thing is to recognize that, because otherwise, in the absence of brave leadership, your company is going to edge towards stagnation.
Sure. Yeah. And I think we see that a lot of times with businesses, and they get to the point. I mean, maybe this is a stretch, but it's like things like Sears or Blockbuster. They were unwilling to be brave, unwilling to do something different. It's like maybe realistically, they weren't lacking innovation. Maybe they looked at things and said, we've got some other ideas. I don't know. Let's just stick to what we know and what we're doing. Likely somebody in the room had some of these other ideas. Somebody in the room was aware of this, but they didn't have the guts to go through with doing something.
No, you're exactly right. There was a Harvard Business Review piece that talked about Macy's and Sears and Nordstrom's, and said that they pursued a timid transformation. And timid won't do the job in today's world. It's too volatile, it's too uncertain, it's too chaotic, it moves too fast, which is why you have to get that bravery muscle and capability, in action. There was one of our great astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, said that bravery is the gradual accumulation of discipline. And that's the right way for people to think about it, which is, I'm going to start small. I'm going to take some brave actions. I'm going to bring others in my team to do the same thing. And together we're going to move up. Then we're positioned to take brave action under bigger pressure and in situations that are tougher. A lot of people think, oh, I'll be brave when I need to. No.
Sure.
There's a great Navy SEAL line that people default to the level of their training. They don't rise to the occasion. And so you have to train yourself in bravery and then position yourself for bigger moments.
So maybe these are gimmicks, but can you train yourself on things that are not as important? Like with this work, let's say maybe you're scared of spiders or something. You're like, I'm going to go into this room full of spiders on purpose. I'm going to let this spider crawl around on me, or I'm going to allow somebody to pick out any outfit from Goodwill. And I have to wear this all day, right? Like, they seem small, but can you even do little things like that to begin training bravery?
Well, you could, but I don't know if you need to go there.
Sure.
I mean, yes, and I mean, if you need to get over some kind of phobia like that, I think you can make progress in that way. What I'm really thinking about is, we all know that there's a problem that we should point out, or there's a conversation we should have with a colleague, or there's maybe a colleague who you recognize needs some help on something, or maybe you need some help, and so it's brave to put your hand in the air. It's hard for a lot of us to ask for help. So there's a lot of smaller things that you can do to exercise the bravery muscle that then positions you to really to be a brave leader in a bigger way going forward.
Yeah. On your site, you talk about how innovation slowdown isn't a strategy problem. It's a bravery problem. I feel like that's kind of what we're getting at here, that it's like a lot of the innovation issues that people are having are not actually innovation issues. These are bravery problems.
That's exactly right. And I think the important thing is that, you really never know where innovation is going to come from, which employee might produce the idea or group of employees. And oftentimes we think about innovation in kind of a top-down way. Okay, we'll appoint a chief innovation officer, and he or she will guide the path to innovation. The better way is to start bottoms up and to have everyone feel that they can be part of important path-breaking solutions. And if you empower every employee to feel that way, then that maximizes your opportunity for innovation, because you're never really sure where it's going to come from.
Yeah. I feel like this is true in every brainstorm that I've ever been in. That, you think you have a great idea and then you get into the brainstorm. And as a CEO, I can say that I've done this, right? Where we bring our leadership team and I'm like, I'm sure I know where we're going to go. And I just can't wait for the team to come up with the solution. And I put it up to a brainstorm and I go,
right,
darn it, I like that idea even better. This is really, really good, right? At the end of this brainstorm.
That's great. Well, if we think about it in the venture capital context too, if you ask any honest venture capitalist, they'll tell you, okay, we're going to make 10 investments, and we know that one or two can be rocket ships. A lot will bounce along the bottom, maybe have some success, and a bunch will fail flat out. Mm-hmm. But they can't tell you which ones in advance. They just know that by seeding a bunch of companies with promise, there will be success. And I think we can think about the same thing, seeding employees to feel a part of the solution and to invest in them and give them the opportunity to innovate and lead the way.
I like that a lot. You coined the term Stand Brave, the Stand Brave framework. What are its core pillars and what inspired it?
Well, what inspired it was maybe going all the way back to Martin Luther, because that's what he did. He stood brave under huge pressure. And we won't face that same kind of pressure in our lives, most likely. But we will face pressures, big and small, every day, every week, every month. So I viewed it as kind of a rally cry to say, this is something that we all want to do and should be ready to do and prepared to do. The framework really is aiming to have people comfortable being brave first for a moment, as we talked about. Just the small little actions, right? I'm going to have the hard conversation. I'm going to put my hand in the air and point out a problem. What organizations need, though, is not to just be brave one and done. They need to be brave for a duration of projects, of important initiatives. So that's really the second stage of brave leadership. And then the third stage is really to be brave for a lifetime, because that's where you pick up sustained innovation and growth. And there's a study done by APCO Worldwide which demonstrates that companies outperform when they have an enterprising or brave culture, which rewards candor and curiosity and risk-taking and reinvention. But to put that brave culture in place, you need brave leaders who are going to not just say, we want you to be innovative. They're going to give them the opportunities and give them the chance also to fail and to throw their arms around people who fail and to reward innovation, because people respond to those, that incentive as well. So what you're really looking to do is to start up people on a small basis, single acts, then through projects and initiatives, and then really a brave culture which lasts for a lifetime.
That let's say ability to fail is huge. I'm proud of our team's innovation. That is one of our three core values we have, which is to be accountable, to be innovative, and to be human. And one of the ways that I try to encourage that on our team is to remind them of something that I actually borrowed from the hospital. So I used to work in the hospital. And as you can imagine, we had what were called sentinel events, which are unfortunately very, very bad things. Somebody amputates the wrong limb, somebody gets the wrong medication and dies. There are some seriously bad things that can happen. And the way that the hospital treated it, at least the one that I was at, was it was a no-fault reporting system. because the whole idea is if you're afraid to say what happened, then the process can never be changed. We can't figure out what this is. This is a no. We just need to know what this is. And similarly, I try to say the same thing to my team, where it's just like, as long as there's two things, right? If it was gross negligence where you just decided to, get drunk and start, changing somebody's ads around, or you did it on purpose, right? As long as it's not one of those two things, then it's a learning opportunity for us. And the reality is those mistakes will happen. And if you know that you have that freedom to make a mistake, then I think that allows people to go ahead and be more innovative and try.
I love that. Now, just picking up on that, in the startup where I was the CFO, we had a rule, which was the only way you get into trouble is if you spot a problem and don't say anything. Because, as you said, you need to surface the issues, and that's what allows companies to improve and to grow and to, as you said, innovate more. And if you have that kind of culture where people are continuously putting their hands in the air and saying, not only do I spot a problem, but I've got an idea about how we can do this better, and I've got a solution, then that's the kind of dynamic environment that creates innovation.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of something I remember reading in the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And I think it was something along the lines of they were just trying to figure out what was going on with certain airlines that were getting in more fatal accidents than others. And they found that it was a culture because of just certain regions where people were less, they felt like they couldn't speak up to their superiors in a way that would challenge them. And so out of respect, they allow the plane to crash and die, right? It sounds ridiculous when you put it that way, but like there are certain cultures that maybe don't allow that to happen. But we can go the other way too, where it seems like maybe it's, everything that you suggest is, somebody's got a negative opinion about this or that. Like, well, that's wrong. This is broken. We could do better, blah, blah, blah. How do you make sure you don't swing too far in the other direction of critical feedback where nothing is now worthwhile?
Well, I think one of the ways to do that is to, and we did this at the startup, is to reward positive innovation and do it with money. We developed a light bulb award where we rewarded employees who came up with the best cost-saving ideas. And, in some ways, that's the best of American culture, right? It's rewarding innovation. It's competitive. It is, an open kind of look at the company, right? It's not closed down. There's no barriers to, making improvements. And so, and it also created collaboration because it wasn't just one person coming up with the idea. Typically, the winners were several people in a team approach. So that was, I thought, something very special. But if you reward positive, innovative solutions, then you'll hear more about them and see more of them.
I want to learn more about the light bulb moment. I feel like this is a really interesting idea. Do you remember any of the things that came from this that you're like, oh, this was one that really shocked me that somebody was able to come up with?
I unfortunately don't, but I remember being surprised by particularly the first winner, which was, not a massive amount of money, but we were looking to save what we could, and it was $75,000 in something that could be changed just kind of with a finger snap. And I believe it was, on the assembly line to avoid, problems in the manufacturing process that would waste material, and particularly far along in the process, so that by stopping things early, you avoided a lot of expense that was put into products that were not going to make it. But no, I was really pleased to have kicked that off, and it particularly in a situation where there's a lot of pressure in startups, right, to make it happen and to make it work, and there's you're under pressure from investors and from the board and from colleagues because we're all in, right? And so something that's a positive each month to point to and to make people proud of was a great moment.
Yeah. Did it ever become a burden? Did it ever get to the point where people were just like, oh, okay, they're asking us for another idea here. Why don't you figure out the ideas?
Well, I think that to be kind of blunt, money helped solve that problem. So, if the reward is always there, and then there's the competitive aspect too, which is, why are so-and-so winning the award? I've got ideas too, so let me put my, idea in place. So I think as I mentioned earlier, kind of the elements of competition and of collaboration and of money, those are pretty strong incentives. Plus then, the pride that goes along with it for being called up and, in front of the entire company to say, here are the winners.
Yeah. Praise in public, right? Criticize
Yes.
in private. How does this differ from the 4 steps in your book, The Instant Survivor? You had stay frosty, secure support, stand tall, save your future. Like, how do these kind of nudge us into this?
I'm sorry, unpack that for me a little bit. I mean, I'm familiar with the 4-step framework of my book, but
yeah. Like, how do those, the idea of like staying cool, right? Staying frosty, securing support, standing tall, saving free. How do those help us to become brave then as well?
Oh, well, because and just to kind of unpack that for a moment, that was really what I had found was a useful framework for companies to work through crisis situations.
Okay.
Because the natural reaction is not to stay cool. And so, that's an important first step, right? In some ways, the crisis experience was a little bit backwards. In other words, what I mean is you don't want your first experience to be under huge pressure. Sure. And so, but that's the situation that I was dealing with and advising Fortune 500 and other companies, right? Suddenly the CEO and C-suite was facing huge pressure around a product recall or a sexual harassment scandal or a criminal investigation or class action litigation, whatever it was.
Yeah. And
so then they had to, take those steps, right, of staying cool and securing support and standing tall, and to move through them. So I think the framework is useful and can be replicated for smaller situations, right? The framework still works, right? Mm-hmm. But it was designed for disasters.
Sure. I think sometimes when I think about things, being able to know how to handle the craziest situations allows me to handle the small situations better. If I can look at this, I say, yeah, stay frosty. Then when you get that mean email from a client, or you get that, nasty message from an employee who's frustrated or whatever it might be, it's easy to not want to stay frosty. It's easy to want to kind of maybe go off the rails. Yeah. But if you can look at it from you say, yeah, it feels, and I remember Melanie Marshall talking about this, the difference between being shot at in some of the places that she had bullets flying overhead and that mean email, your body almost doesn't recognize the difference, and it can feel the same because that it just unlocks this drive in us to protect ourselves and whatever that might be. And so sometimes being able to look at this and say, okay, how do I take this framework for big crises and now use that framework in some of these smaller situations? Okay, I need to stay frosty. I need to secure some support. If we can, I look at it, and it's like you said, to your point, maybe train it in these smaller situations to use that framework. Then when that big framework, when that big thing happens, we're already trained to do that.
Yeah, because I think one of the reasons that people struggle, right, and they're told oftentimes in life, be cool, settle down, so forth.
Sure.
But they aren't told how to do that. Mm-hmm. And the way really to do it is to have a plan in mind, which is when a problem comes up, to really take a look at it and see what is it and what's the severity of it and how can I move on this problem? What's the first action I can take? and who can I get to help me address it? And, that kind of thinking isn't what we're, taught in school or, have heard other places. But if you have that kind of framework in your head, then you can move through, as you're saying, William, whether it's a big problem or a small problem, you can use the same framework to move through it.
Yeah, because going back to preparation, I find that I'm a lot more brave in situations where I've prepared for them, right? You'd like to make sure that you're also going to be brave in situations you're unprepared for, but the way to do that is if you already have like this set of tools and process that you're very comfortable with implementing in those situations where you aren't maybe as emotional. So when that thing does happen, you say, okay, I'm still scared. To your point, bravery, right, takes place when you are still in fear. But you're like, I'm still feeling this. My body is having a physiological response to this stimulus right now, but I have some practiced behaviors that I'm able to implement.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm sure you've heard the phrase, William, flexible within a framework. And the beauty of having that framework kind of laid down and innate to you is that it then does allow flexibility, because there's no, cookbook response that we can say, in a situation, you always do A, B, C, D, E, right?
Sure.
You may have to bounce to F and come back to B and waltz down to Z and, be flexible. But knowing kind of how the framework can assist you and guide you is central to a better response.
This is one of the biggest reasons why I'm a fan of both sports and music in children. Because in both of these, you have to be able to run with this. And so I was lucky enough to play, basketball, and I was also a musician and played in bands and stuff. And in both of these situations, you run the play, but if you just run the play, you're going to miss the opportunity, and you have to be able to have that flexibility within that. And the same thing is true for music, right? You're playing in the band, and it's like, oh, you know what? The singer decided that they want to go ahead and go with a third chorus this time, and so you got to just run with it and figure out how you're going to go with that. And so I think that there's some idea where it's like there's a framework, but you can be flexible within that. I've found that the people that I hire that have played sports or been in music or in some other way have already developed these skills without them even realizing it. It seems like they're more capable in a lot of others. And I'm sure there are more ways beyond just sports and music. Those are just two that I identify with.
Now, one of the reasons I think you've identified something so important is because it's critical that employees can grow with the company as it grows. And a company at every stage has different challenges, different issues, different concerns. And some employees can be great just at the startup stage, but then can't evolve into being leaders and successful employees as it moves from 50 to 250, 500 and beyond. And so I think the kind of individual you're describing who has learned to grow and to be flexible and to in a way take pride in being flexible, because what first seems kind of like, oh boy, here we are outside of the plan, to roll through that and to, have success outside of a plan, I think is something people are very proud of.
This reminds me of something you and I were talking about before. E-commerce leaders often feel very stretched. They've got customers, tech, supply, AI. How do they cultivate a culture where saying, I don't know, or asking hard questions is seen as brave, not weak?
Well, that's part of the conversation that, and they need, it isn't just a conversation. They need to live that and lead that, right? And it can even be a value that's, put up and talked about, right? Sure. Which is, And I wrote a piece recently about Satya Nadella at Microsoft saying we're going to move from essentially a company of know-it-alls to a company of learners. And so I think if you transmit the idea that we're all learning and we're all learning together and we won't know all the answers and none of us can claim to, and that's fine. And we're operating in a world that's so dynamic that what were the right answers 6 months ago might not be the right answer today. And we're going to keep evolving and looking for it and supporting each other as we find that. And so I hope we can each help each other find the right answers as we move forward. So it's, again, a shared experience, not where there's some command and control approach that's put forward by a leader, because that doesn't work in today's world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It reminds me of something else that I believe was also in the Outliers book, Malcolm Gladwell. And it's funny, you go through certain books that you quote a lot, and I haven't quoted this one in I feel like probably a year, but I'm quoting it twice in the same episode here. But he talks about, if I remember correctly, people that were trying to do pottery, and they told the one group that it's like, you've got 30 days, and I'm maybe paraphrasing and I might get some of this wrong, but you've got 30 days to make the absolute best vase you possibly can. And the other group, it's like, just make as many vases as you possibly can within 30 days, right? And at the end of the 30 days, the group that just made as many as they possibly could ended up making better ones at the end than the one that was like, hey, you're going to just really focus all 30 days on this perfect piece. And I think to your point, the more that we practice, the more likely we are to get the outcome that we want. And this is true for creating content. I've noticed it in making the podcast, and anybody who's done anything would say that it's like your first 100 anything sucks usually, but the more that you practice this, the better you will get at this. And so we all need to be learners. If that's a part of the culture, that's going to be beneficial.
No, I love that. I mean, one of the things that we talked a lot about at Goldman Sachs was looking for the pure plays. The organizations, companies that were just focused on one thing. And the fact of being focused on that would mean that continuous improvement, as you're saying, would inevitably occur. And particularly with companies that were passionate about the product and passionate about their people. And that would lead to remarkable innovation and growth. But the focus that those companies had, and really the same thing is true for Bravery. It's not a value to add, it's a guiding principle to adopt so that it reinforces all of your other values. You mentioned your 3 values. Those, I'd suggest to you, would be reinforced and kind of restamped within the company if they're supported and guided by Bravery.
Mm-hmm. All of them, all 3 of those would be better values if they're supported by Bravery. Completely agree. You are more accountable because you're brave to be accountable. You are more innovative because you have the bravery to be innovative. You are more human because of the bravery to be human. And the way that we describe that is just that idea. It's like, we're all having, good days, bad days, et cetera. And so it's like, you have the ability to be able to like talk to people, ask them questions, be a human being with that. And so you have the bravery to be able to do those, have those conversations. If you were going to come into my company, any other company, how would you identify if we have a bravery problem?
I don't have to identify it. I know you do.
Because it's universal. Okay.
Yes.
Well, okay. What are some signs that somebody has a bigger problem in their company with bravery than another company? Like that this is a significant issue?
Well, I'd say what I've seen a lot is that companies are in love with their cultures, and they will wax eloquent about their culture, how we are so supportive and we're so kind and we're so innovative. We encourage innovation. And those are the ones that I find actually there is the biggest gap between the espoused marvelous culture and the lack of bravery. Because, one of the things I know we appreciate is that it's not enough to be nice, right? If you want to achieve in life, you're going to have to be brave. And that means, as we talked about, that you will have to truly hold up the mirror to the company and to yourself and to your colleagues. And you will need to make each other uncomfortable, not in a mean way, but in a way that's beyond nice. And so the cultures that are more kindergarten-like and that overweight how nice we are to each other are the ones I think that are most at risk of not being brave.
Because we already feel those things, we're just not saying them.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's why just what you talked about earlier, William, which is to give the freedom and the permission to say those things and to do those things, which may not work, may fail. That's fine. As long as it was, wasn't reckless and stupid, right? But you undertook something that was a good shot to take, then it's so, self-reinforcing. As you talked about, that's the kind of magnetic culture that not only attracts talent, but retains talent. Because when people show up and feel they can be heard and be seen and be part of a solution and grow and be noticed and given credit for innovative ideas, then, wow, it acts as a magnetic force with others in their group, and they can propel each other forward. Because also, not everyone can be brave every day. But if you have a team of brave people, then somebody on that team is always doing something brave that day, and that will encourage others to be brave either that day or the next day.
So let's say we start this. Let's say that you run into a company that maybe has not allowed as much conversation around the idea where, like you said, it might be offensive, right? There are some things that will be offensive. You don't need to say them in an offensive way, but just by the nature of the truth of them are offensive to say. How do you begin doing that as a leader to begin fostering that type of thing in an organization that already hasn't been that way? And the thing that I'm seeing in my head is, the boss comes in and says, "Hey, I'm just going to start picking on you guys a little bit." Wouldn't say it like that, but it's like, "Hey, you're really struggling with this. You're struggling with this. You're struggling with this. We need to shape it up," kind of thing. And it's like, that might be offensive, right? But that's the wrong way to go about it. How do you begin to foster that in a way that doesn't just put everybody immediately on edge there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because one of the reasons, for example, that I always want to start with a keynote address to a company is because bravery isn't something that we talk about, and we tend to be mixed up about it and even uncomfortable talking about it, because we oftentimes think that a phrase I used a lot on Wall Street, there's a lot of room between 0 and 100. People don't think that way oftentimes about bravery. They think they're either brave or a coward, but there's a lot of room in between.
Everything's a continuum.
Yeah. So I like to start with a keynote beyond that. Then I like to work with a company and do an assessment and say, kind of, did what I talked about, the tools I give you, did you put those to work? Did they land? A little bit like the piano teacher. Did you do your, practice on the piano?
Yeah.
I think the key really is to start in the shallow end of the pool and to open up the conversations in a non-threatening way, and starting at the team level, just, let's talk about bravery. What's it mean to you? And, when have you been brave in your life? And when do you struggle to be brave? And what do you think is holding you back? And who do you admire that you've seen do brave stuff? And why do you admire them? And what would it take for you to be more like them? And really bring up the kind of self-awareness and awareness of bravery and what it is and what it isn't. And really identify the actions that are brave, that make sense to the team, and that they will want to do and understand why it's important to do. As we've talked about, just about asking for help and offering to give help to people who look like they're struggling, and standing up for employees who may be getting mistreated, and coming up with better ideas, and pointing out problems. All those things help employees see that bravery leads to a better place, and is something not that's just talked about, but that each of the team members do, the leader supports, and then that will be self-reinforcing. So I think the key, though, is to get everybody in the pool, because bravery is not a spectator sport. You have to get into the pool and start to swim.
So getting into the pool, right? The boss being the one who's saying, you're doing. That's not brave. The boss saying, I need the feedback. That's a lot more brave, or at least a better way to begin starting that conversation and allowing that. How do you feel about anonymous feedback then in this situation? Because it's not very brave to be able to say everything you possibly can think of when it's anonymous. It's maybe a very, very, very infinitesimal way of starting that feedback process, but versus just saying, hey, I need you to actually come through. Let's say maybe on a leadership team, not opening it to, I need you to tell me, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? Give me the actual feedback as opposed to,
I think I would be a little hesitant to go there first, because it kind of ties back to what you were talking about earlier, which is if you get people focused on the hole in the donut, that's where they'll spend their time. And so certainly starting into Bravery, I'd want them to focus on the positive aspects and how it makes them feel. And haven't they noticed that some of their proudest moments in their life are when they've been brave? And so bring bravery up as a positive shared experience that they can have together. And I think that then can still open up those conversations and the feedback that's so important. But then I think if you, in some ways as a leader, if you've said, we're going to be brave together, and that will work, kind of two ways, and it'll work with our clients and our customers too. We're not going to just be brave under the roof. We're going to be brave in how we interact with our customers and clients. That's a vision that your team can rally round. And then I think that opens up more naturally the conversations, which going forward probably don't need to be anonymous. Then you can really have that kind of, shared back and forth, as long as the leader's ready to, step up and hear it.
You said that bravery can take you to a better place. Is there an example that you can think of where a team implemented this bravery framework within their business and it clearly had a monetary difference in what they were doing?
Yeah, I'll tell you about a team that I worked with at a communications firm, and we collectively put together a brave vision and really rallied around it. And the idea was to be brave with each other, and particularly brave with our clients and leading them to be brave. And, during the pandemic, there were, a lot of parts of the organization which, came under pressure. Ours outperformed. We didn't lose anybody. In fact, had to hire more people because we were so busy. Wow. And I think that's because we were being brave. We were being brave in how we, and it made it, as I talked about earlier, magnetic for people to stay, and we could attract great talent, and our customers could feel that and experience that bravery with us because we were showing them how to be brave. So it was a kind of virtuous cycle that led to higher revenues.
I like that. How about the flip side of that? Can you think of a moment where bravery was missed in an organization? One that could be a public one, right? Something that you've seen where you're like, they missed it.
Well, I think we talked about the big department stores.
Yeah, that's a good example.
That missed it. I'll give you an example, and this is a very small thing, but I think it's important, which is, in my own case, there was an assignment to help a company in a crisis, and it was overseas. And we had an employee who was on the ground overseas, and the client said, we don't want to work with your representative who's in country. Well, that was the person best positioned to understand their situation, give advice about how to address it, right? We could have ideas from, the US, but that wouldn't necessarily, those kind of ideas wouldn't be tailored to their country and situations. So it's something where, in retrospect, we should have just said, well, we can't do the work then, and not tried to do the work. And I think a lot of companies can get themselves into trouble when they either don't have the capability or aren't able to use all of the resources that they need to address a situation. And it takes bravery to pass on revenue and to say to a client, I'm not going to do that. We can't support you in the way you're looking for, so we're out.
I love the way you worded that. Bravery can sometimes be not a do, but a not do. How do you know which one is the brave action? Because in this situation, I could say that there could be somebody on either side that could say the brave thing is to take on the client and say, we're going to figure it out because we are brave and we will know that we can figure it out. And there's also the bravery that says, we are going to figure out how to make do without this revenue. Both of these are brave actions. Mm-hmm. So how do you decide which one is the brave action and which one is actually still fearful?
Right. Well, I think they say that every crisis is a values test, and this is a mini crisis, but it's really still a values test. And I think the value that organizations should stand behind are, we're going to do our best work and not have any limits on that, mm-hmm. and know that will then produce satisfied clients who will be good referral sources, who will be pleased with our work. And to me, it wasn't really a close call on this, because sure, we might lose some revenue if we had decided not to do the work, mm-hmm. but doing it, we were hamstrung. Mm-hmm. And we told the client, we'll continue to try and help you, but you're not getting the best from us. So, we picked up the revenue, and we did as good a job as we could, but it wasn't the sterling job that we could have done with the help on the ground.
I like that you brought it back to values. In my early days as an entrepreneur, we didn't have mission statement, core values. It's like, the mission statement was just get stuff done, right? Like that was it. That was what we do. And I didn't realize how valuable it was until a mentor of mine told me repeatedly that I needed to implement EOS, that I needed to, EOS Traction and read the book Traction. And once we did, I saw how valuable that mission was and those values were, that they're not just some, ethereal thing out in the distance that mean nothing. It's easier to be brave when you understand why you're being brave. If there is a mission, and to your point too, it's easier to know which decision is the right decision if you have those values there. And you can say, right, hey, one of these things aligns with my values, one of these does not align with my values. Therefore, the brave decision is to do the one that is aligning with my values. That is the bravery.
And by the way, it is so powerful when you do that, because everyone is watching. Under the roof, they're watching to see, are the values just words on walls? Or are these things we stand behind, that we stand up for, that we live? And your customers and your other stakeholders are watching too, to see whether you live up to these values that you have laid down. And particularly, under pressure, as I mentioned, every crisis is a values test. And then people particularly watch to see, well, you say that you believe in continuous improvement. Are you really showing it to us? You say you believe in safety. Are you showing us that? What are you showing in terms of how you live in responding to a crisis?
Mm-hmm. You've seen a lot from .com, CFO startups to federal prosecutor. I think that I read there was even a political race maybe thrown in there. You've seen a lot. You've been through a lot. Was there ever a moment in your own life where you were maybe exceptionally bummed out isn't the word that I want to say, that you really needed to dig in deeper into bravery than others, where you're just like, I'm not sure I can get through this?
Well, yeah, I'd say in the, you mentioned about running for political office. I ran for a statewide political office, as they called it. It was an incomplete success, meaning that I lost. A few weeks after the campaign was over, the Secretary of State certified the election results, making me a certified loser.
That's such a brutal way to put it. Yeah.
And that was a rough place, because I had poured myself into this campaign, because I was then, after it was over, out of work, had drained a lot of savings in pursuing the campaign.
Sure.
And so that was, I would say, a dark moment. And that's what really led me to rely on the same framework to get through this that I'd advised Fortune 500 and other companies to follow. And that's what led to that book, was that I felt, after I was able to get through it by following that framework, that it was just so important to share that with other people so that when they ran into problems, they could have a framework to look to and work from. Because, we go through life without people saying, here's kind of a playbook for you to follow. We typically will just kind of find our way through it, but it's a lot easier if you have a framework to work from.
The older I get, and I'm 40 this year, so I'm crossing into the place where I can call myself old now, old enough, right? So the older I get, the more I find myself appreciating tradition. When I was younger, it seemed like tradition was one of those things you're just like, this is dumb. This is just because it's how it's always been done doesn't mean it needs to be done that way. And there's some truth to, again, innovation. There's some truth to that. But the older I get, the more I realize that a lot of traditions are steeped in frameworks. And that's really what they are, is they are frameworks that others have done and tried. And the ones that seem to have succeeded are the ones that have these frameworks. And again, you can have flexibility in the framework, but there's something about this idea of it's been tried for thousands of years. And this seems to be the thing that works generally the best for the most people.
Yes, no, well, also, the reason I think frameworks are so important these days is because the world is so turbulent and so chaotic and so facing such transformation and such pressures from AI and technology and geopolitical issues. And so it's important to have some stuff to kind of rest on so that you don't always feel you have to kind of start from scratch and reinvent, right? Have something to at least look to as a way to think, okay, here's how I'm going to move through this. I may need to adjust it. And of course you will. You need to be flexible as you go. But at least here are the right questions to ask. And here's where I should bring my focus. And that will help you get into action, which is the biggest problem most people face in a crisis or other problem, is not to take brave action right away. And brave action leads to more brave action and to positive results, and again, is a virtuous cycle.
That's something that Melanie and I talked about that I really appreciate. My approach to this that I like to think about, there's a Bible verse that says, thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. And the phrase that I always liked about this was that it says a lamp unto my feet. And I remember the first time reading it, maybe not the first time. I remember at some time reading that, I want to say it was maybe in high school, thinking, that's a really weird way of saying it. Why a lamp to your feet? Can't I see the rest of the path, right? But the reality is, oftentimes we can't see the rest of the path. The rest of the path is still completely in darkness, but I can see where my next step is. And that's all I could do, is I could take this one step right here. And I have found that in my own life, when I get into situations where I'm fearful, because we all do, and I need to be brave, that just taking a step usually ends up being fine. And it could be the wrong step. What's interesting about this, I found, is that sometimes you could take the wrong step, but simply taking the step allows you to be able to be not paralyzed and to be able to move and redirect if you need to.
Yes. Well, and stay with that for a moment, the idea of a lamp, because I think that the great leaders aren't just holding their own lamp. They are supplying lamps to others on their team who help light up the earth beneath them, but sometimes light up the sky and really show what the whole situation looks like. And with more people carrying lamps, that's really what brings a company to life, is that it's then a shared experience of seeing collectively, here's where we are and here's where we're going. And here's, as you talked about earlier, the vision we have and the mission we're pursuing.
Well, and what's interesting is you get that many lamps together and all of a sudden you can see a lot more, right? It multiplies that, which is nice.
That's right.
What am I not asking about when it comes to bravery? Especially as it relates to, the corporate world and e-commerce businesses and founders. What have we not talked about that you're like, you really need to make sure we talk about this too?
Well, I think we should talk about the fact that, I admire folks who are starting up businesses and trying to grow them, and they are brave. And I think the challenge is to maintain that bravery. Because I mentioned about leaders oftentimes operating near empty, and it's because they may have started off brave, but then they've let it disappear under the pressure of, okay, we need to raise more money. We need to, we've got this administrative issue. We've got this personnel issue. This competitor has come up with this other idea. And the kind of day-to-day moments and pressures step in the way of the brave vision we talked about, and of maintaining and supporting your team to be brave and to take brave actions and have brave conversations. So I think what I worry about for leaders is that they are letting their bravery be eroded or fall away under the pressure of what they're doing day to day. And the problem is then it leaves them and the rest of the team unprepared to deal with the challenges, as we talked about, of today's volatility, uncertainty, and transformation. So what I would encourage founders is to keep seeding the bravery, keep supporting the bravery, keep talking about the bravery, keep rewarding brave actions, keep looking to hire brave employees who will grow with the business as it grows. Make bravery central to what you're doing, because otherwise you're putting yourself and your company at risk.
It reminds me of this story about a patient going to the doctor, and he says, "Doc, everywhere I touch, it hurts. If I touch, my chin, it hurts. If I touch my ear, it hurts. If I touch my nose, it hurts." And the doctor says, "You've got a broken finger." It's not that the rest of his body's okay. It's just, just quit doing that kind of thing. Sometimes I think about this and it's like, okay, they are naturally brave people, founders, as a general rule. They've proven that they have some bravery. And then, like you said, the pressure maybe gets in the way of some of that bravery at a certain point. Why does that pressure get in the way? And how can they avoid that getting in the way of their bravery? Like, what pressures are?
Right. Well, and actually, let's stay with that for a moment. I think one of the risks that founders may face as well is to think it's enough for them to be brave, and that they can be brave, pioneers at the front of the wagon train who are leading everyone along the path. That's a mind shift they need to make, which is no. This is going to be not a wagon train led by one person. This is going to be a horizontal line of people moving forward together. Mm-hmm. So I think the way to really solve the bravery issue is to take the burden off yourself as a founder and appreciate that others can be brave too, and that you want them to be brave, and that you are going to always be looking to support them being brave. So I think that's the way to do it, because founders will be swept up in dealing with a variety of issues. Fine. Make certain then that you've created kind of a brave army, because as the general, you can't do it yourself alone.
That's so good. I think that you're exactly right. Almost because out of necessity to be the founder, you had to be brave alone to a point, right? You had to create the company. And so there's this mental shift of that you have to get out of this. I have to do this on my own to, wait a minute, I now have a team. I now have others who can be brave with me. That's a critical shift.
Yeah. And also that your success is only going to come by creating a brave team. It's not going to be enough for you to continue to be brave, even if you can do that, which is hard under all those pressures we talked about. But to really propel success, you want bravery all around you. And we can use that analogy. You talked about sports earlier. you want bravery all over the field, right?
Yeah.
Not just at the quarterback position.
Right.
And in the military, you want bravery at every level, right? Brave generals aren't enough, right? It's brave soldiers in the trenches. And that was really the story of success on D-Day was that folks who were, platoons got blown apart, right?
Right.
Different people pulled together who then were brave in pockets and, helped break through the German lines.
Mm-hmm. That is the epitome of bravery. I want to get to know the human being, Jim Moorhead, as well. You like tennis a lot. This is something we were talking about. Who do you think is, if you were going to, let's say, start your own tennis team, you're doing doubles, who is the tennis player that you're saying, I want this person on my team?
Well, okay, I'd make a distinction.
Okay.
And I need to look, I'm going to look kind of in the current moment back versus, there's hot players right at the moment, but it's,
Sure.
I think maybe too soon to know what their, future is going to be. So if I'm putting together a team, my singles player is Novak Djokovic.
Okay.
And my doubles team are the Bryan brothers.
Okay.
And the Bryan brothers, won the most Grand Slam titles playing doubles, and then, had this dream chemistry, right? By being twins, we know how those folks can intuit each other's,
100%.
moves.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So they had this magical connection off the court that they brought onto the court, plus had, supreme talent. But, I mentioned Novak Djokovic because he came into such a difficult situation. When he came onto the tour, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal were already in front of him and already winning Grand Slams. Mm-hmm. And in the year 2010, just as a data point, Novak Djokovic had won 1 Grand Slam, Rafael Nadal had won 9, and Federer had won 16. Wow. And then by this year, Djokovic had 24 Grand Slams, leading the way. Nadal at 22 and Federer at 20.
He took over. Wow.
Yes, he just took over and figured out. And the reason it's relevant, I think, to your, founders and other C-suite folks is because he got to work and figured out, what can I do for myself? What can I eat? How can I train? But also, he held up the microscope to his 2 major competitors and thought, what are they doing? What do I need to do to not only match up to them, but to beat them?
So it was bravery, right? The bravery to say, let's say, it's brave to say, I'm not currently number 1, but I want to be. That takes bravery to admit, because
that's right.
Even to be at his level, he has likely committed his life to this, even when he only had 1, right? Like this has been in everything, and to say, like, I'm still not number 1.
No, and by the way, stay with that for a moment, William, because think how many people who were, top 10, top 20 players couldn't make that jump. That's a giant jump to think, wow, here are 2 giants of the game, and I'm going to play through them, and I'm going to end up with more Grand Slam titles than they have.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. To even stick with it is in and of itself a bravery thing, right? And how many times I would say that we would even get to that point where, like you said, it's like there's a giant there, and you're just like, it's not worth it. I don't have the bravery to push through the pain that it's going to take for me to go from here to here. So moving on.
Well, and not only, I mean, it's you have to have, and this is what really they say distinguishes Djokovic, is a mental belief and a ability to be calm in those pressure moments. He has won a number of matches where his opponent had match points in Grand Slam events, and he would maintain this calm, and at least this outward calm, and work through those moments that other people wouldn't be able to do.
Mm-hmm. I think it has to be an inner calm too. I don't know if you can make that if there's not some type of inner calmness that's there.
Yes.
I, why do you think that he was able to do what so many others weren't?
Well, what he would point to is how he grew up, because he's Serbian and he grew up during the war there. And I heard him say that success was his only option, because at one point his father held up a $10 note and said, "This is all we have." And so he was looked to as the one who would support the family and put it on a different path. And so his determination was just deep and intense.
Mm-hmm. He was able to stay frosty. What is your way? How do you stay frosty? Situation's crazy. Is there something you say to yourself?
Well, I'll tell you, part of it is to, when I'm working with clients on this, is to think outside in, meaning that it isn't important what I'm thinking. What's important is what my clients are seeing and needing. And what they need in a crisis is reassurance. And they need a reassurance that they will get through it and that they can move past it and resume focus on their business. And so what they're looking for from me is to transmit that calm that we were talking about and that confidence. And I do believe that. I mean, it's very rare that a company will be knocked out by a crisis. They may not handle it well. They may not be as brave as I might want them to be. Sure. But they will typically get through it if they've built up enough of a kind of franchise that protects them, enough of a moat around them. But, I guess partly it's because having been through, as you talked about earlier, so many of these different situations, I have a confidence and I'm working from a framework in my head about how to address these situations. And I have a pretty wide span of vision from, having been, on Wall Street and in two major communications firms and in two of the, giant law firms in the country, so that I've just seen so many different situations that I feel pretty comfortable that the path that I'm suggesting that a company take is the right one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things I like asking people about is, because you seem like somebody who's clearly got a framework for a lot of things in your life. Mm-hmm. You think through things. You're intentional about your actions, your words. The name of the podcast, Up Arrow Podcast, is a mathematical notation for making numbers way, way bigger than exponents that I really appreciate. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, how are we not just up arrowing our business? How are we up arrowing our personal lives as well? Mm-hmm. What are things in your own personal life that you are passionate about and have been intentional about improving? This could be relationships, it could be health, it could be, anything. But what are things in your personal life that you've been intentional about outside of business?
Well, it's interesting. I would say a good deal of what I've done outside of business has been a desire to perform at full tilt. And so that means, and by the way, that's partly because that's what, my clients have needed, and that's what my, family has needed. And so I have looked after my health very carefully. I have, eaten well, stopped smoking a long time ago, don't drink. And then also I'm very conscious about exercise. Playing tennis, getting to the fitness center, lifting, cardio. And by the way, I'm not going to suggest that, I can do, 50 pull-ups or, anything crazy, right? But
sure,
it's just a desire to and partly because when I was doing crisis work full time, you never know when it would happen. Mm-hmm. So, I couldn't get caught on a down day. I needed to be ready to go, like kind of as a first responder. And so it couldn't be no time out. I'm not feeling that great today. Back with me tomorrow, right? You had to be good to go. And so I wanted always to be in a position to be able to, as they say on the street, hit the bid.
I love that. I've got some boys that I work with. I was with them in 6th grade, 7th grade, and now 8th grade. One of the things that I've talked to them a lot about is there are many things in life that you don't know, but there are a lot of things that we kind of already know are intuitively likely good for us and likely to lead us down the path that we want. And so it's like, if you want to be successful, if you want to do these things in life, which one is likely going to help you on that path? Going to bed on time or staying up until 3 a.m.? Say, well, we can answer that question. How about, drinking or not drinking? So I like that you said that you're like, I don't drink. It's like, we pretty much know, for the most part, there are very few examples of somebody saying, you know what, alcohol has changed my life for the better. Very, very few examples of that. There's plenty of examples of the other. And so there are a lot of things that we intuitively know. Working out is likely going to lead you towards good things. Now, that might not always be true. Somebody could end up, rhabdomyolysis. Like, there are things that can happen, but for the most part, we know that these are things that are beneficial and going to lead us to be in a position that we are ready to tackle whatever else might come our way. And so I appreciate that about that.
Just a quick point on that too. I think one of the things that we know we always try and do in our own lives, and certainly do as leaders in organizations, is to make good decisions. Mm-hmm. And part of it is, we've talked about analytical frameworks and trying to have a wide span of vision and trying to listen well and, build alliances and, all kinds of things that can help us do that. But one of the things that helps too is to be in a healthy position and in a healthy frame of mind. Because one of the rules I had early in my life was, I'm not going to make an important decision if I'm not feeling well, because I think it'll be a bad decision. And so the better we're, the better rested we are, the better exercised we are, the better fed we are, I think that improves our decision making.
I like that. It's been absolutely amazing talking to you today. I feel like I've learned so much from you. If people wanted to work with you, follow you, read your books, what's the best way for them to get in touch and stay in touch with you?
Well, I think, the easiest way, I put it right out there, on my LinkedIn. I've got my email there, jim@jimmoorhead.com. And I have a website up under that name, jimmoorhead.com. LinkedIn can be a good way to connect. And, as I mentioned, my real focus these days is on keynote speaking, because I'm really trying to unlock bravery inside organizations and leaders and teams. And that's the first best step for doing that.
Yeah, it's the first way to just have that conversation like you were talking about, get people on the same page. That way bravery is a good thing, and then you can begin implementing tactics. Jim,
well, and by the way, if I could say for a moment,
please.
Wow, it's been a fantastic conversation. You've asked questions that I hadn't thought about, hadn't anticipated. I think you've taken us to a depth in the conversation, which I hope has been really useful for your listeners.
Yeah. Thank you again for joining us, sharing your time, sharing your wisdom with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you so much, William.
And thank you everyone for listening. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.